A woman spending time with her family on a typical Saturday morning heard the doorbell ring and went to open it. What happened next reminds us more of a horror movie than a real-life incident. It took the detectives more than 30 years to unravel this terrible mystery, whose finale shocked and outraged everyone. Friends, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it is very important to me. Marlene McKinnon was born on April 15, 1950 in Michigan. You see, she grew up without a father, and since she was a teenager, she dreamed of having a big, close-knit family. Very soon the dream came true. The girl married a man named John, and they had 2 sons. But only a few years later, the family faced an unexpected tragedy. Marlene's husband suddenly died of illness, and the woman was left alone with 2 young children. Since then, she has spent most of her time at work trying to provide for her sons alone. Despite the fact that it was difficult for her, the woman sacrificed everything for her children. 6 years after her husband's death, she met a man named Michael Warren, and they soon married. The man was engaged in the sale of used cars, and after the wedding, he started his own business in this direction. By then, Marlene was making good money, but instead of spending all her money, she was trying to save it. The woman invested in Michael's company and also helped him manage it. The man himself was also good at this business, and in the following years, he began to bring them decent money. Over time, Marlene and her husband expanded their business, bought several properties for lease, and their financial affairs went up. The family moved to a prestigious suburb of Miami called Wellington, where they bought a large house. They seemed to have built a near-perfect life. However, in 1988, Marlene faced another tragedy. Her eldest son died in a car accident. It was a huge blow to the woman and her youngest son, Joseph. After all their hardships, their lives were just getting better, and suddenly, fate presented them with another challenge. Yet they found the strength to move on. After the tragedy, Marlene became even closer to Joseph, as he remained her only next of kin. Her husband also helped her to escape the loss. After the death of her son, the woman began to think about selling properties she and Michael had rented out. Although the business was making good money, it was a constant experience for Marlene. It was not uncommon for tenants to be late or deprived of income. In each case, the woman did everything possible to find the optimal solution. It was very difficult for her to put people out on the street, as she was a good-natured person and perfectly remembered how she herself was experiencing financial difficulties with 2 young children. On the other hand, they could not afford to let people live in their homes for free, and eventually Marlene wanted to get rid of the business so that she would no longer face such moral dilemmas. 2 years had passed since her son's death, and the family had just begun to recover and return to normal life. Yet again, they faced something terrible and unforeseen. On the morning of 26 May 1990, Marlene was at home with her son and 3 of his friends, who stopped by for breakfast. Their kitchen was arranged so that through the windows one could see the access road. At some point, the doorbell rang and Marlene went to open it. The son saw a white Chrysler parked in front of their house. The next second, the woman opened the front door and saw a man dressed as a clown holding 2 balloons and a bouquet of flowers. Marlene said, "That's so sweet," but then something unexpected happened. The clown pulled a gun out of his pocket and shot the woman in the head. Her son and his friends rushed into the hallway, where they were waiting for a heartbreaking sight. Marlene was lying on the floor, blood everywhere. The man in the clown costume stared at them for a few more seconds, after which he returned to the car and drove away. The son called an ambulance and then decided to chase the attacker. At that time, his leg was in plaster after injury and the guy could not drive. He told 2 friends to stay with his mother, asked his girlfriend to drive and went with her to the direction where the criminal had gone. By then, however, the clown had gone off the grid and had failed to find him. Marlene, unconscious, was taken to the hospital. The detectives started the investigation, and the first thing they did was talk to everyone in the house. The woman's son said he couldn't see any of the attackers were wearing a clown costume. He had gloves on his hands and a wig on his head. The only thing his son remembered was that the criminal had very dark eyes. His friends added that the clown was quite tall and his shoes stood out against the suit. They looked like work shoes. A neighbor who was walking his dog near Marlene's house also saw the clown, but could not share any important signs with the police. The investigators called for a white Chrysler and began searching for other evidence. Of course, the first suspicion fell on Marlene's husband, Michael. He had just left for the Miami racetrack that morning, and he wasn't home when his wife was attacked. From the first hours of the investigation, the police had several important reasons to think about his involvement. First, they found out that Marlene and her relatives were very fond of clowns, and their house was full of paintings and figurines depicting these characters. This suggested that the assailant knew this fact and chose this outfit for a reason. 2 hours after the incident, the police received an anonymous tip from a woman who called the investigators and said they should look into Michael Warren and a woman named Sheila Keene. Sheila, who was 26, worked with Michael at his car rental company. The detectives learned more deeply about the rumors that they had a secret affair. Their relationship was suspected by some colleagues, so they immediately shared this information with the investigators. Here, the police discovered another possible motive. If Michael was in a relationship with another woman and wanted to break up with Marlene, he was faced with one big problem. Most of the real estate and businesses that the family owned were registered to his wife, in which case Michael would have lost an impressive portion of his fortune in the divorce. The police immediately checked the man's whereabouts. Turns out Michael was driving his car about 100 miles from home, and he had 2 of his friends with him. The investigators concluded that he could not have physically committed the crime. After learning of the attempt on his wife's life, Michael rushed to the hospital and has not left her room since. The police talked to Sheila. She stated that there was no romantic relationship between them and that she had nothing to do with the crime. The woman added that she was at work at the time. Detectives also interviewed Sheila's husband. He said he was aware of rumors about his wife's affair with Michael, but could not confirm whether it was true or not. The man added that his wife moved out about a month ago, and in fact they were not together. Although the police did not have any evidence linking Michael and Sheila to the crime, they continued to consider their involvement highly probable. Given that the husband could not physically have been outside his home that morning, the police wondered, could Sheila have been the clown for the suit? None of the witnesses could determine the sex of the assailant. Moreover, Sheila was known among colleagues for her character. One of the women's responsibilities was to work with clients who were late in making rent payments. In most of these cases, she had to take the car away from them, and she was adamant. Some of these incidents led to serious conflicts. That's why the woman always carried a gun. After the doctors removed the bullet from Marlene's head, experts determined that it was fired from a. It is noteworthy that Sheila had the same caliber, and the police went back to examine the weapon. However, the woman stated that the gun had been stolen or lost months before, and the detectives were again left with nothing. The police continued to dig deeper and learned that after Sheila moved out from her husband, she moved into a rented apartment. Investigators also heard rumors that Michael was paying for this apartment. Here, the police were waiting for an interesting new discovery. All this time, their colleagues had been trying to figure out where the perp got the clown suit, the balloons and the flowers. At first glance, this was proved to be a very difficult task. However, the detectives were lucky enough to establish that on May 24, 2 days before the Marlene assassination attempt, a woman came to the costume store near Sheila's apartment. Staff said that the store was closed at the time and that they were leaving. However, the woman persistently knocked on the door until opened. She stated that she urgently needed a clown costume, wig, face makeup, and a red nose. The salesman tried to explain to her that the store was already closed and asked her to come by tomorrow, but the woman was adamant. Then the employees did sell her these things. There were no surveillance cameras in the store, so the police could rely on the verbal description of the woman's appearance. The salesman said she was tall and thin, with dark hair. The detective showed them pictures of several women, and the staff said the customer looked like one of them, Sheila. As for the balloons and the flowers, they were traced to a supermarket about a mile from Sheila's apartment. The seller stated that a woman had bought the same goods just hours before the assassination attempt on Marlene. He wrote it, just like a costume shop employee, tall, thin girl with long dark hair. The seller added another interesting fact. According to him, the buyer showed coarse and to some extent even male manners. By that time, the investigation had already lasted 2 days, and on 28 May, doctors told the police that Marlene had died. Despite their best efforts, the impact of the close-up shot was too severe. As a result, the case was reclassified for murder, and the detectives continued to look for more possible evidence against Sheila. They asked the judge for a warrant to search her apartment. While the police waited, something else happened. They were informed of a similar vehicle in a parking lot 13 kilometers from the victim's house. Investigators arrived there and quickly confirmed that this was the Chrysler on which the killer was traveling. Inside, they found several long dark hair and orange fibers that looked like pieces of a clown wig. During a search of Sheila's apartment, the police found the same orange particles. There, they also found work boots that matched the description of the witnesses. A similar model was on the clown the day of the murder. Despite all this, the police had one significant problem. In those years, DNA testing had not yet been used, and without him, all this evidence was circumstantial. With a high probability, the court could have acquitted Sheila, in which case it would have been impossible to reconvict her of murder. Then the detectives wondered, where did the car that the clown drove to Marlene's house come from? And then they found out something very interesting. One company employee, Michael, told them that a month and a half before Marlene was killed, a man called them to rent out a rental car. But there was one problem. This man mixed up the phone numbers in the car from another company, Michael's main competitor. When the employee told the boss, Michael acted very strangely. Instead of pointing out his mistake to the client, he told the man to simply bring the car to the parking lot and leave the keys in the car. Michael then asked this employee to take him and Sheila to this parking lot and never tell anyone what had happened. The employee watched as they got into the car and drove away. It was the same white Chrysler. It is noteworthy that Michael and his competitors had recently had a major disagreement. The problem was that in his advertisement, Michael was making the competition look bad. They didn't like that their brand was being covered in a negative way. The detectives decided to look into Michael's business more closely. During the audit, they found numerous violations of the law in the manipulation of taxes and insurance. Moreover, they found evidence that Michael sometimes resorted to illegal vehicle refund methods, even when customers paid on time and did not break any condition. During the inspection, the police also spoke to an officer who recalled something interesting. According to him, Michael and Marlene had a fight at work once. When the woman left, Michael asked the employee, "How much would you take to make my wife disappear?" Although the whole thing sounded suspicious, the detectives still had no evidence linking Michael to the murder. However, he was arrested for various business manipulations. Initially, the court sentenced the man to 8 years in prison. He was released 4 years later. Later in 2002, Michael married Sheila and they moved to another state. Although the detectives failed to prove their involvement in the murder, they continued to monitor them. The police discovered that after Sheila moved in, she began to introduce herself to all new acquaintances under a different name, Debbie. She also dyed her hair dark to light. He and Michael opened their own restaurant, and it seemed like they had managed to build a wonderful life in a new place. However, rumors soon spread among the staff that Sheila had killed Michael's ex-wife. Apparently, one of them came across information about the crime and learned that the police still suspected them. However, the detectives were still unable to prove their guilt, and the case finally stalled. It was resumed only in 2013, and a new team of investigators requested a re-examination of all available evidence. By then, DNA and other evidence technology had reached a new level in comparison with the 1990s. It took several years to examine the evidence. First, the experts compared the orange-colored particles found at Sheila's apartment car and the murder scene. The analysis showed that they are absolutely identical. But the most important evidence was waiting for them ahead. Forensics took a DNA sample from several of the hairs found in the white Chrysler and compared them to Sheila's DNA. They were a perfect match. Thus, the detectives obtained irrefutable evidence that Sheila was in the very car that the clown drove up to Marlene's house. This was enough to bring the case to court, and the woman was arrested in 2017. At that time, Sheila was 54 years old, and she still denied her guilt. She was denied bail and waited in her cell for trial. As for Michael, he insisted that he was innocent of Marlene's murder and that Sheila had nothing to do with it either. He hired expensive attorneys for her, and the wait for her to start the trial stretched for years. In preparation for him, the police had uncovered some facts that were not previously known. It looked like a year after the murder, they were approached by a lawyer who worked with Michael on his business. He said that about a year before the murder, Michael had asked him a very strange question. If the husband kills his wife, what would happen to the property in her name? Will his husband get it? Counsel was surprised at this question, but this did not prevent him from actually giving Michael advice. He said that if the husband asked his acquaintance to commit the murder and the court could not connect the husband to the man, he would receive all the property of his wife. But then the lawyer said something that later shocked the researcher. He told Michael that if the killer wore any costume, such as a clown, he would never be identified and would not be punished. Another shocking confession came from a man whose father worked for Michael's company at the time of the murder. He confessed that his now deceased father had helped run illegal schemes for an extra fee, such as rolling mileage counters to sell cars more expensive. But on the day of the murder, Michael asked him to do something far worse. He told the man to get rid of the gun and the car. Apparently, it was a car that the killer moved on to after he left the Chrysler in the parking lot, and the employee complied with these requests. Before he died, he told his son about it and added another important detail. The man said that the second car was hidden in a river channel. As soon as the police received this information about his son, they searched the channel and actually found a car there. Unfortunately, there is no evidence in it. However, the very fact of her presence at this place confirmed that the witness was telling the truth. The start of Sheila's trial was constantly delayed until a final date was finally set for 12 May 2023. But on April 25, something unexpected happened. The woman announced that she wanted to plead guilty in exchange for refusing the death penalty. In the event that she lost the trial, she would face exactly this sentence for murder. Her lawyers explained the situation as follows. Sheila is innocent of the murder, but she fears for her life. That's why she took responsibility for someone else's crime. However, there is a much more logical explanation. Under the terms of the deal, she pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, for which the penalty is 12 years in prison. That was the sentence she received, but more interestingly, the court deducted from this period the time that the woman spent behind bars since her arrest, about 5.5 years. But that's not all. The judge reduced the remaining period of association with Sheila's good behavior. In the end, the woman had to spend 16 to 24 months in prison. Her lawyers assured her that they would be able to secure her release after the minimum period. So Sheila was found guilty of the cold-blooded murder of a woman in front of her son, and for that, she received an outright ridiculous sentence. As for Michael, his involvement remains unproven, and he remains at large. He will probably never be charged with the murder of his wife, as there is no evidence against him. Despite all this, Marlene's son thanked the detectives, who were able to get to the truth and did not abandon the case for many years. His mother's death was his greatest tragedy, as she was his only living relative. Nevertheless, he managed to overcome this pain, opened his own small construction firm, and normalized his life. Share your opinion on this story in the comments and be sure to like it under this clip if you like it. Also recommend to subscribe to my channel. This is very important. Thank you for watching.